smoke cigars, and drink whiskey. Okay, so we just put that right out on the table right now to tell you about the life of Prince Jonah, Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole, whose life was filled with magic and good things and hard work and opuali'i. Opuali'i is that sense of responsibility within that among the ali'i, where you provide for your people. It's not about being on a pedestal and people looking up and bowing down to you. It's about you coming down and being with them and working with them hard. And he did that from the time he was a young man, well educated, along with his oldest brother, David Kawananaʻole. And we also acknowledge the Kawananaʻole family through the Royal Societies, through all of our association with them. We also acknowledge the most recent burial here at the Royal Mausoleum, and that is the family of Kawananaʻole and Prince Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole, and that is Princess Abigail Kinoiki Kekaulike Kawananaʻole, whose mother in 1960 established the Prince Kūhiō Hawaiian Civic Club. People often think that they're the original club, but and this responsibility is actually that here at Maunaʻala every year it goes back and forth, so we look forward to next year. I'll probably be more on time for your service than my own. So Prince Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole is born to High Chief David Kahale, and he is from actually Oahu. He is associated with Oahu, but also as the ali'i are connected to many islands, if not all of the islands. And his mother, Kinoiki Kekaulike Elua, she was the second Kinoiki Kekaulike. So when we look at genealogy, we go up a couple of generations to Kaunuali'i. And Kaunuali'i's daughter was Kinoiki Kekaulike, and she was the first of that name that we remember, we hear often, especially associated in our lifetime with Princess Abigail Kinoiki Kekaulike Kawananaʻole. And that name, Kekaulike, is an homage to her descendancy from the king of Maui. So a woman named Kekaulike, named for the man Kekaulike. And you find that often in Hawaiian genealogy. Pi'ilani is another name we think today as a Inoa Wahine, but it's actually named for an ancient king of Maui, and they're all related. Something about, so the three brothers, Prince David Kawananaʻole, Prince Edward Admiral Keli Ahunui, and Prince Jonah Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole, they are descendants of the royal lines of 4 islands, of Kauai, and we think of Kauai because of Kaunuali'i all the way back to Manu. And that is, and when we sing Hawaiian music and Brickwood knows, trustee, Galataria, excuse me, but when we sing songs for the island of Kauai, we often sing about Manu, Kauai, Manu Kalanipo, that's an ancestor. We come here, coming this way, Oahu, and we think of Kakuhihava, all the way Bilohe, Kakuhiheva's Puali'i, Kakuhiheva, Ma'ili Kukahi, all the way back to the ancient voyaging chief Maveke and Mo'ikeha from Tahiti. We think of Maui again, Kamalala Valu. So Maui Nui Kama, or Great Maui of the Chief Kama, is named for Kamalala Valu. And he's only one of the Kamalala Valus in Hawaiian genealogy. There are many. And then our island that we refer to as Moku Keawe, the island of Chief Keawe, and there are many Keawe chiefs. But Keawe, in this name, Moku Keawe, as a moniker for Hawaii Island, is Keawe Ikekahia Okamoku. And Keawe Ikekahia Okamoku was a great-grandfather of Kamehameha Ekahi, and many descendants today in this room included. Many descendants today that we can trace our lineage, and way before Keawe Ikekahia Okamoku, all the way to the time of Liloa. Liloa and his son Umia Liloa, Lono Kahikini. We have a Lono Kahikini right here in the room today, who's named for that line of ali'i. So the three young boys born at Koloa, Kauai, Kīkaulike was from Kauai, and they were born in a large hanepili, or a traditional grass house, which was probably fitted with some modern conveniences of the time, maybe some chairs and some beds, but that's the kind of house they lived in. And maybe there was another more modern structure nearby at Koloa where they were born. They were brought to Honolulu when they were often, would go back and forth, but both of their parents, Kinoiki Kekaulike Elua and David Kahanepoli Pipoi, passed away when they were quite young, still yet. So they were brought into the guardianship of Kalakaua and Papiolani. By then, King Kalakaua had already been elected king, and that was in 1874. So 1871, when Kūhiō was born, the last of the three boys, they were really quite young when their parents passed away. Kalakaua was already living in the old Iolani Palace, not the current one, but he had his home also at Waikiki, which was Pualelani. And again, for the Prince Kūhiō Hawaiian Civic Club and many of us as well, the song Pualelani is one that reminds us of the beauty and the elegance and the ho'okipa, hospitality of that home in Waikiki where the boys grew up. In 1881, King Kalakaua took his world tour, and he becomes the first world sovereign, any country, anywhere around the globe, to actually go around the world. And so we hear that name, Keali'i Ka'apuni Honua, the chief who went around the world. That's a name of a halal today under Ku'uhula Ne'Momiho. That is the name also of her kumu, Ativiki Rodriguez, remembering the 1881 around the world trek of King Kalakaua. What he did at that time was he made contacts and exhibited diplomacy like no other. So he was, again, a handsome, tall, well-groomed, well-raised, and so he could go any place around the world and establish contacts there, which would eventually become, I guess, the equivalent of consulate or consuls around the globe. And he comes back then 3 years later in 1883, and he builds what is now the current Iolani Palace on stone. The original palace, which was located at that same land area, which is Pohukaina in Honolulu, was made of wood. It was really the palace, of Kamehameha III, who is of all, all of the world monarchs, of the Hawaiian monarchs, Kaunikiaoli Kamehameha III ruled the longest. So now Kamehameha Kalakaua is elected king in 1874. Does the world tour in 1881. In 1883, he builds the palace, and by then, the young Prince Kalanianaʻole is already under the care and the hanai of Queen Kapiolani and King Kalakaua. Queen Kapiolani's sister, Kinoiki Kekaulike Elua, is the mother of the boys. But we have to remember also, I was corrected years and years ago, is that Prince Kūhiō was not the nephew of King Kalakaua, he's the nephew of Queen Kapiolani. But we have to remember also that King Kalakaua's grandmother and the prince's father, Kahanepoli, his grandmother, is the same person, and her name is Kamokuwiki. So Kamokuwiki on that side, on the Hawaii Island side, and then all of the Kaumuali'i and all of that on Queen Kapiolani's side makes the Ko'anamakoa family, makes Prince Kalanianaʻole equally related to both sides. So by then, the banyan tree in the back, when you park at the palace, and you get pretty kia when you park there too long because the Manu in the tree. But the kids would climb on the banyan tree, they would slide down the banister in the new palace. By then they were already young boys, 10, 11, 12 years old. And eventually they are schooled at first at Oahu College. Oahu College is now today known as Punaho. Then St. Albans College, and St. Albans College today is known as Iolani. So that's where they got their schooling initially before they were sent off to California, San Mateo, and to the military training schools there. And that's where the three brothers brought the sport of pe'enanu. or surfing to the world. And they were in school and they had some time and they were stationed or they lived near where a mill was located, and they got planks of redwood and they had either pictures of or they had their own, the old surfboards that were called moʻolelo, which are the long flat surfboards, narrow, and they had boards milled there out of redwood, and they went down to the beach, and more than once apparently they drew quite a crowd. Because here are these brown-skinned, handsome, really fit boys on the beach with their boards. They go paddle out and they ride in, they keep kaha in like an evil bird, and they were just the top of the town. And so they are credited with bringing Hi'inalu to the world. Long before even Du'ukahana'moku, we honor him as well as our ohana from the Paoa ohana. They're all related to these families. Eventually, they come back home. The political unrest in Hawaii is before everyone's eyes. By the 1891 passing of King Kalakaua in San Francisco, by then, long before then, now only two brothers remain, Prince Kalanianaʻole and Prince Kalanianaʻole, and they have been given the title of Princes of the Realm. So they have the title, and it's kind of more of a world royal protocol kind of thing. So that's when they became Prince Kalanianaʻole, Prince Kalanianaʻole, and Prince Keliahonui when he had passed away years before that when he was in school, I believe, on the continent. They also went to school later in Europe. So they are princes of the realm, and so before Kalakaua had passed away, he had first named his youngest brother, William Pitt Leleo Hoku Kala'oleva Elua, the second of the Leleo Hokus in our Hawaiian world. And so, Leleo Hoku, the youngest of the four Kapa'akea siblings, passes away. He then puts in line for the throne Princess Kaiulani, who was the daughter of his sister, and then also the two boys, first Kalanianaʻole and then Kūhiō. So they become heirs to the throne. And the rest of the history we understand and we know. You know, we can hear it often and over again, but we know what did happen. Kūhiō eventually passes away in 1922 with no heirs. Maunaʻala, who had preceded him in passing, had heirs and has heirs to this day. So that is why we have to remember and we respect the direction of Kūhi of the Ali'i long before our time to honor that direction, and here we are today. One of Prince Kalanianaʻole's greatest achievements was becoming a diamond miner. He owned a diamond mine in Africa. He fought in the war between France and who was the other country? Morocco. I was going to say Morocco. but you know what? Use a Hawaiian search engine. Go Ogle, and you can go find that out. So he leaves after the overthrow. He was devastated. And prior to the overthrow, he was in prison for 1 year down at Iwilei, at Oahu jail. He was in prison because of his complicity in trying to restore Queen Liliuokalani to the throne after the overthrow. So 1893 is the overthrow, 1895 is a rebellion, and after that, and while he's in jail, as the romantic story goes, so now he has a wahine. And her name is Princess Elizabeth Kahanu Ka'auwai. And she had, again, another genealogy that was really very high, Kauai, Maui, Hawaii, and Oahu as well. And she would go visit him every day in Oahu prison. So when you go down to watch the movies down at Iwilei, in that area over there, that's where the jail was. And we're all familiar with that famous picture of Kūhiō wearing his striped suit, and they wanted to pardon him. The provisional government at San Trudeau and it was his aunt. And his aunt, Kūhiō, she lived all the way until 1898, so she's around during all of this. Kalakaua had passed away. Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole is queen, but Kūhiō, she was around, and she had a lot to say, and only spoke in Hawaiian. But she said, oh no, if indeed he is guilty of this treason, then he will serve the time. But if he is not guilty of it, you're gonna find out later on the hopena, or the hua, the fruit of that decision. And we don't ever go further than that. But you think about the moʻolelo Hawaii, the way of Hawaiian thinking. It's very different from how we think today. And we think we know. We think we understand the worldview or the puana ike of our kukuna, but we really don't. So he marries, Prince Kalanianaʻole marries Princess Manu, and they go on a sort of a self-indulged or self-proclaimed sort of exile. They leave Hawaii, they go to Africa, they go around the world. The stories about Kūhiō being on a train, from here to California, you gotta go by boat, of course, and then from there you gotta cross the American continent on a train, and how he was mistreated or ill-treated because they thought he was some sort of a slave, and then he got into a few brawls on the train along the way with his wife until they found out that he is a prince of the Sandwich Islands of the Hawaiian Kingdom, however they refer to it at that time. And he makes his way, but he eventually comes home. And he comes home because now this is the time when the annexation is happening, and we still use air quotes because of the absolute legality or illegality of that whole process. And so he comes home again because of his upbringing and his opuali'i, his insides that were trained to be a leader, and not to again be adored from a distance, but to get over there and work. And he eventually, and he had some pilikia, a little pilikia with his aunt in Kūhiō. They didn't see things quite the same way, but we cannot go back and judge what they were thinking at that time, because we don't know all of the particulars that were involved at that time. But he decides to run for office now. The annexation, had occurred, and he had to figure out a way to get into politics. By then, John Wise had been elected as a territorial representative in Congress, and then also Robert Wilcox, who's another royal descendant. But eventually, in 1902, Kalanianaʻole, by then he is, I think, as a political party, it really doesn't matter, because that still causes hihia in my brain today about who belongs to what party and what they represent. But he's elected in 1902 to Congress as a territorial representative, which means in that predominantly, in fact, completely white male Congress, old Hawaiian men, he is the only one who is of brown color, and certainly from Hawaii, and that's a 2-year term. When he's in Congress, he has no voting power. He can't even vote for bills or pass bills, but he's elected 10 times in a row in Hawaii for those 2-year terms. So let's all do the math together. How many years did he serve in the U.S. Congress? 10 times 2. I had a professor at Kūhiō, he was from Samoa, Akira Gaudia. His name was Professor Tula Tula, he's a 4. So 20 years, and he's glad, and to get from here, we can go to Washington, D.C., you can get pretty close on Hawaiian Air. And if you can get to Hawaiian Air, you're going to have 20 miles when you come back. He didn't have Hawaiian Air. He had the ship across the Paki Pika, the Pacific Ocean to California, and the train in the snow, in the horrendous conditions that long travel can sometimes bring forth. But and I wonder when Congress would go into recess and it's snowing in Washington D.C., bitter cold, and all that, and he would come home to his home Pualelani. Waikiki, how it must have felt for him to get into his shorts, get into his t-shirt, get his spear, or get his papaʻenalu, or get his canoe, get his own personal canoe that was named just So if you have a Hawaiian bracelet, believe extra letters, it's just That's all you have. But how he must have felt and the olu and the kumehana, Hiloko Polopino, inside of himself and his wife Kahanu, who travels back and forth with him, how he must have just melted every time he came home. Well, in 1917, the discussion of the Hawaiian homes or a Hawaiian Rehabilitation Act had begun to percolate, and there were meetings at the home Pualelani during the breaks from Washington, D.C. He would come home. And that was also, those were the underpinnings of the Hawaiian Civic Club that had the same goals and the same mission as what the Hawaiian Rehabilitation Act was supposed to have had. And that is to restore and reinvigorate the Hawaiian people economically, socially, politically, and leadership and all of that. And so in 1918, this is a year after his aunt, Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole, passed away, he establishes the Hawaiian Civic Club of Honolulu. And that was with the blessing of Reverend Akaipo Akana, who was one of his closest friends, who had just been named as Kahu to Kūhiō Church. And so he was, in the re-establishing, or we say in Nariki Rose Mele, Pai Pai O Ia Kapo Haku, putting back the stones to the foundation, is that Reverend Akana at Kūhiō Church restored Hawaiian language sermons. And language is a part of the identity. So Kalanianaʻole, our prince, still going back and forth for the next few years, comes home in 1921, and in early 1922, he passes away in his chair, in his house, Pualelani in Waikiki. And that was the end of that, the long journey and long story, although he was only, I think, 52 or so when he passed away, 52, 53. So our prince today, March 21st, all the way back to 1871, his birth, his parentage, his hanai, his opualii, his sense of alakai and adventure. They loved to go on safaris, and he flew airplanes before airplanes were even known to most people around the world. He was really quite the adventurer. Many years ago, as we move into the melody that we're going to all sing for him, Kuhome Okeoka, and the Maunaʻala family says sometimes it's Kuhome Ikeoka, but the song has morphed over time. But it was Uncle Bruce Kepler, who was a longtime leader of the Prince Kūhiō Hawaiian Civic Club, who used to always say, and I will always continue to say this, that Albert Nahane'a's mele, Kuhome Okeoka, is the only mele that expresses mahalo to the ali'i for the Hawaiian homes. I didn't finish that part of the story after the Hawaiian Civic Club was established in 1918. In 1920, finally the last iteration of what has become known as the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was written in 1921 and in 1920. And in 1921, it was passed by Congress. And that is how we end up with all of this Ainaho Pula Pula. So on this island, Waimanalo, Kewalauka, Papakolea, Kalawahine, Nanakuli, Ohaiula, Kaulua Kahai, and all of that, and then all the way to Anamola on Kauai. And that is because of the hard work and the non-voting member of Congress who had the charisma and the class and the elegance and the pono to be able to, as a brown-skinned Hawaiian, to have influence over Congress. And when he passes away in 1922, the volumes and Uncle Bruce gave me a copy of all of those speeches that were given on the floor at the U.S. Capitol in Wakine Kona, extolling his absolute solidness as a man, as a human, but as a Hawaiian who everyone admired. So when Uncle Bruce reminds us that when we sing, thanks to you, our chief, that is a song by a Hawaiian homesteader in Keaukaha that first expressed that. Today we have many that continue or that share that sentiment of aloha and humility of ha'a that reminds us that things don't just fall out of the sky into our lap. Sometimes they do, and mahalo, get a fool for that. But most times they don't. You have to work hard, and he was a hard worker. So why don't we all stand, and why don't we all sing Kūhiō Kalanianaʻole.